And this is what I played for him.
Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. I'd just like to apologise for some of the audio quality this week. We're actually temporarily right next door to a building site. It's been really difficult to record this week. And on top of that, we've got some weird electrical interference, which I've not experienced before, and I can't track it down. But hopefully it won't ruin your enjoyment of the episode. Hello, Mark here. Welcome to episode 10 of the Cuckoo Town podcast, Dreams of the Dead and the Not Quite So Dead. These are real-life experiences taken from my 2015 book, Wyatt's Weird World. I hope you enjoy. Dreams of the dead and the not quite so dead. Dreams of the dead is a term I use to describe a distinctive type of dream, a dream that I'm sure we have all experienced at least once in our lives. These dreams feel different to my normal dreams. There's an indefinable quality to these special dreams where I meet up with people who have passed on from this life. There's an awareness on my part that it's for real. There are usually key moments which will hammer that message home. However, I don't always wake up from this type of dream with a lot of clarity. I just recall certain short parts of a conversation I may have had with a loved one. I usually kick myself that I don't remember far more detail, but perhaps we are not supposed to remember everything. Or maybe, at a deeper level, we do recall the full conversation. The dream state appears to be a kind of border post, a meeting place between this three-dimensional reality that we live in and whatever lies beyond, somewhere where we can occasionally get together. A normal standard dream, for me anyway, tends to be rather abstract in nature. It jumps around all over the place and there's no real logic. Dreams of the dead are different. They appear to have some purpose. The deceased loved one seems to be using the dream state to let me know that they are still around. They also try to give me some validation that it really is them. This could be a unique sense, or it may involve them doing something that was unique to their personality. On other occasions, maybe they just want to pass a message to me, or a mutual friend, or perhaps just let me know that they know about a recent happy or sad moment in my life, or they may hint at a fresh development that may be coming soon. This is the first of my Dreams of the Dead. I've called it His Name is Andrew. You'll understand why when you listen. Jack had been in India during World War II, working as an RAF lorry driver. After the war ended, Jack took on a delivery driving job at Skeet and Jeffs in Woking, and in time he ended up managing the plumbing shop within the business, selling plumbing and heating products to the trade and retail public. I was assigned to be Jack's new assistant towards the end of 1977. I was 17. Jack was a married man of around 55 when I first met him, a proud father of a little boy. Strong as an ox, about 6 feet tall, powerfully built, he cut an imposing presence. He had short white grey hair with a neat side parting. He was a hard but fair man, and thoughtful too. He always put the needs of others before himself. He was very well thought of within the company, a much-loved man. He was not naturally verbose. He used his words with great economy, as if they were being rationed, and some of them had to be saved for later. When you asked Jack a question, he would give you the answer in as few words as possible. The thing I recall most about Jack, though, was his ability to find fun in almost every situation that presented itself. He also taught me how to do basic car maintenance during our lunch breaks, and to this day I'm grateful that he took the time and effort to do so. At Christmas time, he would bring in a few bottles of various spirits to share around with our other workmates from elsewhere in the company and our favourite customers. He had his own unique blend of 2 or 3 of these drinks, which we soon christened Jack's Firewater, because it left such a wonderful warm afterglow. I've experimented to find that particular blend many, many times in previous years, but I've never tasted anything quite as good as that since. Now, here's the crux of the story. Jack was very, very proud of his young lad, Andrew. I never met him. And he would often tell us about young Andrew's interest in computers. Now, bear in mind this was 1977. Andrew, he told us many times, wanted to work in computers when he grew up. At that time, computers were all still huge. They were very much in their infancy. They took up whole rooms, as they did at the company I was working at. My year's assignment to Jack was soon over, and I was soon reassigned to another department of the business, at another premises, 10-minute walk away, and sadly, I didn't see quite so much of Jack after that, except for the odd occasion when I bumped into him when I was up at head office. Sadly, in the mid-1980s, I heard that Jack had suddenly died, totally unexpectedly. He couldn't have been any older than 62 or 63, I don't think. It was a big loss to all of us who had known him. It upset me when I heard. It was hard to go to the old plumbing shop and not see Jack's cheery face there. Sometime around 2005, we were living down in Cornwall, 200 miles to the west of that company where I met him. I had left for town back in 1989. One day I was having a conversation with my wife, who had also known and liked Jack, and we couldn't remember his son's name. We had been wondering if his son, who possibly would have been by that time something around 35 years old, had ever achieved his boyhood dream of working in computers. That very same night, I dreamt about Jack. Jack was stood right in front of me. I could smell him. I don't mean that in a nasty, disrespectful way. What I do mean is that we all have our own distinctive natural sense, although we are not necessarily conscious that we do know each other's body or odours. To put it another way, I didn't even realise that Jack did have a distinctive odour before he came to see me in the dream. I had not been in his close presence for at least 20 years, and if you would have asked me to think about how Jack smelled the day before my dream, I would have had absolutely no idea, and I probably would have said, he doesn't smell. But in my dream, I could smell him, and I could feel his unique presence. Somehow, when we have these dreams of the dead, we instinctively know our loved one's unique bodily scent at some deeper spiritual level. I believe it is our loved one's way of validating that we really are communicating with them and not someone impersonating them. Jack was very real in my dream. I cannot stress that enough, but I'm aware that my words here may be too inadequate to drive that point home. I can only remember Jack saying 4 words to me in that dream. Those words were, "His name is Andrew." In the morning when I awoke, I remembered that dream, and I knew that it was no ordinary dream. I remembered Jack telling me his son's name, so I excitedly told my wife over breakfast that Jack's son was called Andrew. "How did you find that out?" she responded. "Jack told me," I replied. "Oh, that's nice," I remember her saying, as if it was a perfectly normal thing to converse with a dead person.
Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies.
I dream of Doreen, another great character, another lovely person, but I was lucky enough to work alongside at that company, Skeet and Jeffs, was a lady called Doreen Davis. Doreen was in her 60s when I was in my late teens and early 20s. At that time, she was helping in the sales office. I was assigned to the show home, and that's how we briefly became work buddies. I was selling kitchens and bathrooms at the time. It had been looked upon as a promotion. That's how they had sold the position to me, but it was a slow, boring job after all the hustle, bustle and laughter that I'd had working on trade counters, dealing with builders, plumbers and other tradesmen. Customers in this show home were far fewer, although when they did visit, I did make bigger sales. During the quieter times, if my work was up to date, I would sometimes just sit and read a book. I would tuck my latest novel behind a product folder as a disguise. I was able to see any management, staff or customers that were approaching my desk, and I could quickly hide my book away if I had to. However, one day I was sat in the show house office reading a book when I got caught red-handed reading it. But luckily for me, it was Doreen who caught me, and she was a bookworm too. Anyway, we bonded over our love of reading. I can recall 3 major things about Doreen. 1, she always had a fag, a cigarette, on the go. 2, she had a lovely smile. 3, she loved books and she loved talking about books. We would soon be swapping books on a weekly basis and discussing plots and writing styles. Doreen put me onto several new authors that I would never have known or sought out in a bookshop without her greater knowledge and encouragement. Doreen put me on to the novels of Leon Uris. We were both interested in history, and Uris wrote great books about big historical events. He made them come to life with his strong characters, and he liked to show the different sides of historical disputes in his stories. A classic example of that, if anyone's interested, is Trinity, which is about the Irish situation. I spent about a year working in the show house, and Doreen was a regular visitor to my little office. She would catch sight of me as she was passing by and say, "Oh, Mark, I've got something for you. I'll be back in just a moment." She would then return a few minutes later with a couple of books and say, "Mind if I put the kettle on and have a fag and a chat while I'm here?" I didn't mind at all. She was such a lovely lady, but she'd already lit up anyway. I used to joke that she was like a mobile library. Once again, I was reassigned to help another part of the business, but I was a little bored and needed a new challenge anyway, so that was okay. Sadly, I lost touch with Doreen as the years went by, but in the 1990s, I heard that Doreen was living in an old folks' home near Godalming in Surrey, which is back where I came from, and she was suffering with cancer. Not long after that, I received the sad news from a mutual friend that Doreen had passed. A few weeks later, I dreamt of Doreen. In the dream, we were having a conversation in a mobile library of all places. She had her hands full with 3 or 4 books which she was putting up onto the bookshelves. I remember suddenly remembering, in the dream, that she was dead. Stupidly, I blurted out, But you're dead, Doreen. I can't be talking to you." "Yes, I know," she replied. She then flashed me one of her beaming smiles, then took another drag on her fag. So I have noticed within my dreams of the dead that the person I'm conversing with had passed from my life, but then, weirdly and amusingly, always seemed to blurt it out to them. "You're not dead." It's almost an in-joke that they, our deceased loved ones, are putting over on us. As with Doreen, when she responded to my daft observation that she was dead, she seemed to take pleasure in responding, "Yes, I know." I recall a vivid dream I had when my dad was in a residential care home at Godalming in Surrey, southeast England. He was at a stage where he couldn't speak, and when we visited him, he didn't show any signs of recognition. As anybody who has watched a parent or any loved one suffering with dementia will know, they become increasingly confused, and those of us who love them, if we believe in some form of an afterlife, we worry that their unique essence will be lost forever. I know I did. Around 2011, I had a dream where I floated through a high window into a large, old-fashioned mansion. I swooped down head first behind a man who was sat in a chair. I could clearly see the back of his head. He had short grey hair and powerful shoulders. He seemed familiar. He turned around. It was my dad. He drifted upwards to meet me. We embraced and we floated around together. The most compelling evidence for me that it really was my dad was his scent, again his scent. And, as on the other occasions when I've had these dreams, such as in Jack's for example, I had forgotten that scent until I was confronted with it again. In other words, I knew that unique scent at a deeper, unconscious level. At that time, my dad hadn't yet physically died, although we were all dreading that day would be coming soon. When I awoke the next morning, with the dream still fresh in my mind, I was fully expecting to receive a phone call from one of my sisters to hear that Dad had died during the night, but I didn't, and he hadn't. I believe this communication between souls can happen at other times too, not just between the living and the dead, as in these dreams of the dead I have shared, but maybe also when people are asleep or in a coma or perhaps high on drugs. I firmly believe that we are separate from our bodies, but we are in effect temporarily wearing a body whilst in this life, or to put it another way, we are the driver of the human three-dimensional vehicle. It is my belief that my dad knew, at a spiritual level, that was separate to his failing body and mind, but I was concerned about him and our soul connection. Dad was letting me know that I needn't worry. But his spirit would carry on, he was still Dad, he still loved us, and he was still going to be around, and that we would all meet up again one day when the time was right. When I had finally accepted that my dad hadn't got long left here with us, I had been thinking about what, if anything, I would like to inherit from his personal belongings. I didn't have any interest in the more monetary, materialistic articles, not that my father had many of those anyway. No, I wanted something that I would treasure for the rest of my days, and something that would be of no interest to my 4 siblings so it wouldn't cause any friction. When people are diagnosed by their doctor with any form of dementia, many of them, as it was with my dad, are still functioning most of the time and aware of their current physical condition, as horrifying as that may sound. Conversely, it gives them time to reflect and prepare. My dad was in that position, and he had clearly given some thought to giving his personal belongings away to his loved ones. I visited my dad when he was still relatively mentally healthy and living at home being cared for by my mother. Just the day before my visit to Shalford to see my dad, I had been considering asking him the next day for a record album, a vinyl album, that he had bought many years earlier when I'd been with him. He had bought it from a small independent record store in Penzance in Cornwall. The album was one that I'd always loved. Dad used to play it occasionally when we were having our family Sunday roast dinners. It was called San Francisco Bay Blues by Jesse Lone Cat Fuller. He was a brilliant bluesy one-man band. I absolutely loved the album cover too. It was cool. It was a vibrant photograph of Jesse playing guitar and harmonica with the San Francisco Bay Bridge in the background. Although I had always loved that album, I'd never bought it for myself, and I hadn't told anyone in my family that I was going to ask my dad if I could have it. I mean, this was just in my mind. Dad bought that album in the spring of 1978, as he had just taken me down to St Ives for a week. Just the two of us. We had stayed with his cousin, Mary, and her son, my lifelong friend, Adrian. I believe in retrospect that short break in St Ives was an attempt by my dad to form a better bond with his eldest son at the time. I think it worked. I had previously got into that awkward, rebellious stage that many teenage lads do. I recall many happy days on that Cornish trip, including walking from St Ives to Penzance. It was a blisteringly hot day. I also remember sitting in a pub one day with him, sharing a few beers in nearby St Earth at lunchtime. The Rolling Stones had just put out one of their best efforts, in my opinion, the album Some Girls, and I recall putting on Far Away Eyes, a wonderful country music / American South parody, and it was on the pub jukebox, and I was trying to convert my dad at the age of 17, 18 to the Rolling Stones. That was never going to happen. I think he enjoyed it, so I can still recall him smiling. Anyway, going forwards now to sometime around 2010, 2011, and I'd arrived at my mum and dad's place in Shalford, my home village, and we hadn't been there for very long, and I was sitting on an armchair just listening to the conversation at the other end of the room and browsing my dad's many books. I suddenly noticed my dad getting up from his armchair at the other end of the room and walking towards me. He went straight to his large record album collection. There were perhaps 250 albums in the cabinet. Dad put his index finger randomly into the albums and he opened them up, you know what I mean, he sort of split them. There, facing me, leaning back on the back section of the collection, was Jesse Fuller playing his guitar in front of a San Francisco Bay Bridge. Dad picked the album out, gave it to me, then said, "Are there any albums here that you would like?" He had a smile that told me it was no freakish coincidence. I don't know how, but I believe that my dad knew that I wanted that album to remember him by. I call this Please Tuck Me In, Auntie Ellen. Tuck me in as in tuck me in bed. When I was a young lad, my mum had this lovely, kind friend who lived just across the road, a lady called Ellen Mears. To me at that time, she was just Auntie Ellen. My mum and Auntie Ellen would take it in turns to visit each other's houses. We're talking about the 1960s. We always knew when Auntie Ellen was visiting because she would shout from outside the rear of our house. She would go, "Woohoo! Are you decent, Di?" My mum was called Diana. "Well, I'm coming in anyway, whether you're ready or not." Anyway, they would sit in each other's kitchens, around their kitchen tables, at least once a week in the latter years of the 60s and early 70s, putting the world to rights between sips of coffee and drags on their fags. Us younger kids would be sent off to bed. Sometimes, if we were lucky, and we had shouted and pleaded enough from our bedrooms upstairs, Auntie Ellen would come upstairs with my mum, and she, not my mum, would tuck me in very, very, very tightly into my bed. Auntie Ellen had a special knack of doing this. She always wrapped me in super tight by tucking the sheets and blankets a long way underneath the mattress. My mum wasn't so good at doing that, but she was very good at doing everything else that you would expect a good mum to do. Anyway, so you may be wondering, why am I talking about such childish things? Why am I basking in this silly nostalgia for things and people long gone? Well, that's a good question, and here's why. In 2015, I had just woken up one morning in my house at Bude in Cornwall. So we're talking like 300 miles away from that village. I know I was fully awake, and I was just thinking about the gardening jobs I had to do later that day. Suddenly, and with no thoughts of Ellen Mears, Mrs. Mears, Auntie Ellen, whatever you want to call her, having gone through my mind for at least a year, maybe even 10 years, I felt movement beside my bed. Then, just to the left of my upper chest, my mattress began to move up and down slightly. Someone was tucking me in, but I couldn't see them. I should add that it was only a feeling. There were no sheets or blankets. I was under a modern quilt. I instantly thought of my Auntie Ellen. It was just such a distinctive feeling. Even though I hadn't experienced it for around 55 years at the time, I knew it was her. It was probably all over within less than 20 seconds, but that was enough. I think that is the point of it. That is what spirits do when they want to prove to you they really are there around you. you and not just imposters mimicking your loved ones. They do something that only you and they would know about, or they might just immerse you in their unique scent, as we said earlier. When my mum and her friend Ellen got together, they were like two naughty St Trinian schoolgirls. It was just the sort of thing that Auntie Ellen would have done, just for the fun of it. I believe that my mum was with her that morning too, and that they both keep an eye on us from time to time. Actually, I'd just add to that, this all comes from my book Wyatt's Weird World, which I wrote in about 2015, and I've had many experiences, different experiences since then. And one of them that sort of ties in with this is several times in various places I have had what feels like a lady running her fingers through my hair, and in the morning I just assume it's Janice. And no, it wasn't Janice. And then I remember that my mum used to do that a lot. She loved my hair.
One morning the sun was shining, I was laying in bed, wondering if she changed at all, if her hair it was too red. Her folks said our lives together, sure it's gonna be rough. They never did like Mama's homemade dress, and how the backboard wasn't big enough.
I thought I'd end this Dreams of a Dead episode with something odd that happened to me a few months ago, but I'm going to get to that actual story later. But first, we purchased a slightly decrepit two-bedroom, typical Illinois-style wooden house, with a siding like we have in America. Nobody else seemed to want it for some reason, which we now know why, I think. We saw its potential, and now, after 3 years of hard work, it's a really beautiful house with lovely landscaped gardens. Now, back in the spring of 2020, when we first moved in to start doing some repairs on it, we sort of realised that, well, the disturbance of the work, many of you will know this, once you start working on an old house or you move into a new house, it sometimes encourages these ghosts, whatever you want to call them. It encourages the disruption, brings them out. And I've experienced this before, and we experienced it again with this one. We would just have sudden random crashes in the attic and just stuff falling over, and we'd rush up there. There'd be nothing out of place at all. This happened a lot, and we heard just huge bangs occasionally, like something was being dropped on the attic floor. I got the impression there was somebody up there. I captured a few orbs, and they were orbs. They were what I would call spiritual energies. They weren't dust. And we sort of kept this to ourselves. And then one day, Janice's daughter came round, and we hadn't told her anything about this. And just before she was going, Janice said to her, sort of setting her up really without telling her, "Oh, you ought to have a look in the attic before you go," because she knew that if there was something up there, she would pick up on it. And she didn't even get to the first step. When she opened the door to go to the steps up into the attic. She didn't even get on that first step. She said, "I'm not going up there. There's a grumpy man up there." So that sort of confirmed what we thought. So a week or two later, I was up there just trying to tidy the place up a bit. And I was just looking around, and I saw these old beer cans just laying around all around the front of the attic, where there was a grill, like an air grill, like you get in these traditional Illinois wooden properties. And it looked as if, and the floor had been slightly worked on at some point. They'd put some flooring in there, whereas the rest of it was just like joists. And obviously someone had been up there at some time in the past, drinking a lot of beer and, just leaving the cans up there. And also when I was up there, I found a Harley Davidson jacket, a leather jacket. We gave that to Hannah, the girl that recognised there was a man in the loft. Shortly after all these, we were getting so many disturbances in the attic, and one or two things down on the ground floor too. So I thought I'd leave them an offering. So I took a beer can up there, unopened, and I just left it there. And I had a word with the guy while I was up there, and I sort of said, we're going to look after this property. You're welcome to stay, but please don't mess with us in the middle of the night, because it's not nice. We never had a problem since there. But just sort of tying in with the actual episode that I've just done on the Dreams of the Dead, it's a very strange thing. I was laying in bed one night, asleep presumably, and around about 3 o'clock, I was woken up by a doorbell ringing. Now, I've had this all my life, where doorbells ring in the middle of the night, but they're not the doorbell of a property that I'm in. They're like a muffled doorbell. I'm not sure how that works, where it comes from. And I was just laying there thinking, another doorbell ring. And I'm just wondering what's going on. And a man's voice from very close behind my head says, and very clearly, "Are we going to let them in or not?" Obviously, it surprised me because there weren't any men in my house other than me. And at that point, when I heard that voice very, very clearly and really close to my head, really close, Janice was thrashing around in her sleep. She was kicking out like she was having a nightmare. and that was it. Basically, it was sort of all over. But I just felt it would tie in with the dreams of a dead and the haunting. Obviously, the sort of low-level haunting that we have.
You got a heart so big it could crush this town, and I can't hold you forever, 'cause even walls go down.
All of these Dreams of the Dead come from my book Wyatt's Weird World, which was published in 2015, available on Amazon, as are my other books, which are my Spirit of Cornwall, A Haunted Legacy. You've been listening to Cuckoo Town, a Leviathan media production, copyright Mark Anthony Wyatt 2022. If you've enjoyed the show, subscribe, like, share, and please do tell your like-minded friends about Cuckoo Town. You can find us on all the major platforms, and we'll be on YouTube too. I'll see you next time then, when we'll take another stroll together down a road less travelled. Bye for now. Be lucky. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Jack of diamonds, you're the meanest heart I know. Well, you up my poor pockets, my silver and gold. I'm going up on a mountain, gonna build me a whiskey still, and I'll sell you one bottle for a $20 bill. Going up on a mountain, gonna stand there looking down, so I can see my pretty baby whenever she comes around. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, and she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July.
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?